Welcome to the Daily Bite. I'm your host, Reverend Steve Andrews. Today's chapter from Numbers 16 really shows us just how deep our sin is, how rebellious we are as the people of God, and even in the face of all the things that God has done for us, how we would still rebel against Him. In the New Testament era of the church, we're thankful for the forgiveness that we have in Christ. And even though I rebel against God every day, I still get to live in that forgiveness. But this Old Testament text is a reminder of just how, again, condemning those sins of ours are, that rebellion of ours. Let's read the text. Now Korah, the son of Izhar, son of Kohath, son of Levi, and Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, and On, the son of Peleth, sons of Reuben, took men. And they rose up before Moses with a number of the people of Israel, 250 chiefs of the congregation chosen from the assembly, well-known men. They assembled themselves together against Moses and against Aaron and said to them, "You have gone too far, for all in the congregation are holy, every one of them, and Yahweh is among them. Why then do you exalt yourselves above the assembly of Yahweh?" When Moses heard it, he fell on his face, and he said to Korah and all his company, "In the morning Yahweh will show who is his, and who is holy, and will bring him near to him. The one whom he chooses he will bring near to him. Do this, take censers, Korah and all his company, put fire in them, and put incense on them before Yahweh tomorrow. And the man whom Yahweh chooses shall be the Holy One. You have gone too far, sons of Levi." And Moses said to Korah, "Hear now, you sons of Levi, is it too small a thing for you that the God of Israel has separated you from the congregation of Israel, to bring you near to himself, to do service in the tabernacle of Yahweh, and to stand before the congregation to minister to them, and that he has brought you near him, and all your brothers, the sons of Levi, with you? And would you seek the priesthood also? Therefore it is against Yahweh that you and all your company have gathered together. What is Aaron that you grumble against him?" And Moses sent to call Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, and they said, "We will not come up. Is it a small thing that you have brought us up out of a land flowing with milk and honey to kill us in the wilderness, that you must also make yourself a prince over us? Moreover, you have not brought us into a land flowing with milk and honey, nor given us inheritance of fields and vineyards. Will you put out the eyes of these men? We will not come up." And Moses was very angry, and said to Yahweh, "Do not respect their offering. I have not taken one donkey from them, and I have not harmed one of them." And Moses said to Korah, "Be present, you and all your company, before Yahweh, you and they, and Aaron tomorrow. And let every one of you take his censer and put incense on it, and every one of you bring before Yahweh his censer, 250 censers, you also and Aaron each his censer." So every man took his censer and put fire in them and laid incense on them and stood at the entrance of the tent of meeting with Moses and Aaron. Then Korah assembled all the congregation against them at the entrance of the tent of meeting, and the glory of Yahweh appeared to all the congregation. And Yahweh spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, "Separate yourselves from among this congregation, that I may consume them in a moment." And they fell on their faces and said, "O God, the God of the spirits of all flesh, shall one man sin, and will you be angry with all the congregation?" And Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, "Say to the congregation, get away from the dwelling of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram." Then Moses rose and went to Dathan and Abiram, and the elders of Israel followed him. And he spoke to the congregation, saying, "Depart, please, from the tents of these wicked men, and touch nothing of theirs, lest you be swept away with all their sins." So they got away from the dwelling of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, and Dathan and Abiram came out and stood at the door of the tents, together with their wives, their sons, and their little ones. And Moses said, "Hereby you shall know that Yahweh has sent me to do all these works, and that it has not been of my own accord. If these men die as all men die, or if they are visited by the fate of all mankind, then Yahweh has not sent me. But if Yahweh creates something new and the ground opens its mouth and swallows them up with all that belongs to them, and they go down alive into Sheol, then you shall know that these men have despised Yahweh. And as soon as he had finished speaking all these words, the ground under them split apart, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up, with their households and all the people who belonged to Korah and all their goods. So they and all that belonged to them went down alive into Sheol, and the earth closed over them, and they perished from the midst of the assembly. And all Israel who were around them fled at their cry, for they said, "Lest the earth swallow us up." And fire came out from Yahweh and consumed the 250 men offering the incense. Then Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, "Tell Eleazar the son of Aaron the priest to take up the censers out of the blaze. Then scatter the fire far and wide, for they have become holy. As for the censers of these men who have sinned at the cost of their lives, let them be made into hammered plates as a covering for the altar. For they offered them before Yahweh, and they became holy. Thus they shall be a sign to the people of Israel." So Eleazar the priest took the bronze censers which those who were burned had offered, and they were hammered out as a covering for the altar, to be a reminder to the people of Israel, so that no outsider who is not of the descendants of Aaron should draw near to burn incense before Yahweh, lest he become like Korah and his company, as Yahweh said to him through Moses. But on the next day, all the congregation of the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and against Aaron, saying, "You have killed the people of Yahweh." And when the congregation had assembled against Moses and against Aaron, they turned toward the tent of meeting, and behold, the cloud covered it, and the glory of Yahweh appeared. And Moses and Aaron came to the front of the tent of meeting, and Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, "Get away from the midst of this congregation, that I may consume them in a moment." And they fell on their faces. And Moses said to Aaron, "Take your censer and put fire on it from off the altar, and lay incense on it, and carry it quickly to the congregation, and make atonement for them. For wrath has gone out from Yahweh, the plague has begun." So Aaron took it, as Moses said, and ran into the midst of the assembly, and behold, the plague had already begun among the people. And he put on the incense and made atonement for the people. And he stood between the dead and the living, and the plague was stopped. Now those who died in the plague were 14,700, besides those who died in the affair of Korah. And Aaron returned to Moses at the entrance of the tent of meeting when the plague was stopped. This is the word of the Lord. It's a tough chapter, without a doubt. We have seen God's people constantly rebelling against Moses' leadership in the last few chapters here. First, it was Aaron and Miriam that rebelled against Moses, and then it was the entire nation. It was the whole congregation of the Israelites that rebelled against Moses and Aaron, Caleb, and Joshua. And now we have together 250 men with Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, and they rebel again and again and again and again. Again, this is the depths of our sin, that we would rebel against the Lord in spite of everything that he has done for us. They have seen the miracles of God. They have been there. They witnessed the 10 plagues. They have been there in the wilderness as some of these miracles happened. The manna that feeds them every day, the quail that God brought to their camp so that they could eat as much meat as they wanted. They've been there. And yet they continue to resist. They continue to fight against. They continue to blame Moses. They continue to blame God for their own problems. So here we are at the beginning of the chapter. Again, mentioned already who these people are in verse 1 and 2. Verse 3, they accuse Moses of having gone too far. There's no specific referent that seems to pair with that. I mean, we're coming off of a few different laws being set before the people, so perhaps it's that. But the root of their argument seems to be the idea of the priesthood, that Moses and Aaron seem to think that they are, well, Aaron in specific, I guess we would say, but Moses as well here is being targeted. But the battle seems to be over the priesthood, over who gets to come before the Lord and serve as his priest, which is interesting because by the time you get to the end of the Old Testament in Malachi, nobody wants to be a priest. They're sick of the priestly duties. They want to be done with it. But here, Korah and his crew see this as a position of power, and so they want it. They even accuse Moses, why then do you exalt yourselves above the assembly? And you can ask your kids this. Did Moses exalt himself? Did Moses want this responsibility, this position that God has given to him? You might recall the burning bush where God called Moses a couple of years prior to this in Exodus chapter 3. It's at least 5 times in that dialogue, that conversation between God and Moses, then that Moses tried to say no, tried not be the guy to do the job. But God continued to work anyway and work through him. And we've seen it several times already since that Moses has tried to weasel his way out of this, that he's tried to get out of being this position. He's asked the Lord to give responsibility and spread it out and give it to other men in this book. We've seen that happen. He has pleaded with the Lord that the Lord would even take his life so he doesn't have to do this anymore. I mean, Moses doesn't want this. But that's not the picture that Korah and his allies, his partners in this rebellion, it's not what they see. So Moses gives them the instruction to make an offering, an incense offering, take a censer and burn it before Yahweh. This is not something that just anyone is supposed to be able to do. If you remember already earlier in the book, Aaron's own sons, so he had 4, 2 of them died because they offered an offering to God that God had not commanded them to offer. The holiness of the sacrificial system, the holiness of offering before the Lord, it's just that, it's holy. It's a thing of God, and to disrespect that is, it's punishable by God's judgment. It's a sin. And so Moses here, this is tough. Moses invites them to do this thing. Go ahead, take a censer, offer incense before the Lord, see if he accepts it. Again, what's the punishment if the Lord does not accept their offering? It's death, and that's exactly what they get. And I say it again, they've seen this. They know what happened to Aaron's sons. They should have known better. But it's pride, it's rebellion. They think that they deserve this. They think that it's theirs. And so in their pride, they think, yeah, I can come before the Lord. I can do this thing. Moses points out that God has already distinguished Korah's tribe as a son of Levi. He's given them such a great gift that they get to serve the Lord. They get to care for the tabernacle. They get to stand before the congregation and minister to them. And yet they grumble and they rebel against God. It's interesting as Moses sends the message to Dathan and Abiram to gather them together as well, that they use that same phrase. Is it too small a thing? Is it a small thing? So as Moses spoke in verse 9, so they speak in verse 13. They refuse to come. Now they claim that Egypt was the promised land. Do you catch that? God has promised, going all the way back to the burning bush, that he would bring his people out of Egypt. He would lead them to this land flowing with milk and honey, which again, milk is not something that they had much of because you can't keep it cold, so you'd have to drink it fresh. So to be able to have a land flowing with milk, that's a luxury right there. And honey is their dessert. So again, imagine a land filled with dessert. That's a luxury reference. God is going to provide for his people. And instead of trusting in that promise, look at them. They're looking back on Egypt and saying, it was our promised land. Why'd you bring us out of that? And why are you trying to make yourself a prince over us, commanding us to do whatever you want us to do? So they don't even come. Now we get the whole thing is set up just as Moses invited Korah to do. They take their censers, they bring them before the Lord, and they offer them at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And then you get verse 19. Korah assembled all the congregation against them. Moses is going to pretend this didn't happen. I mean, when the Lord appears, there in verse 19 again, he's going to seek to punish. He's going to seek to bring about judgment. Let's back up. So verse 19 is just like chapter 14 when they tried to kill Moses. The whole congregation has gathered against Moses again. And this time, again, God comes. His glory, his physical presence appears right there before them. And he commands Moses and Aaron to separate, get away, so that he can destroy the congregation. What do Moses and Aaron do? Question to ask your kids. See if they're following along as you read the text. What is it Moses and Aaron do? Do they just walk a step aside? No. Just as Moses did back in chapter 14 when these guys were trying to kill him, he stands up for them. As though the congregation is innocent here, which they're not. They are standing against Moses right now. That's an opposition. They are sinning too. But Moses prays on their behalf that the Lord will not, on account of Korah's rebellion, the Lord will not blame this whole congregation. And so the Lord spares them, just as he did in chapter 14. The Lord listens to Moses, who intercedes. And this is something too. I mean, as Moses intercedes before the Lord in his judgment, Jesus intercedes before the Lord in his judgment with us. So Moses pleads to God to not destroy the congregation, even though they deserve it. Jesus pleads to the Lord to not destroy us, even though we deserve it. And that's a beautiful thing. And in Christ, the Lord does. He listens, he relents, and we are forgiven, thanks to what Jesus has done for us on the cross. So Moses goes and he has the congregation leave Dathan and Abiram so that they aren't killed as well, and then makes this challenge. I mean, he puts the Lord on the spot here in verse, 28, 29, 30. They will know that it is God's choice that Moses lead them. If he kills these men, if God kills these men, if he judges them in a new way, something he hasn't done before. If they die by a plague, we've seen that before, nothing new. That would be not God having chosen Moses. So it's got to be something new. So Moses gives the example of this something new, the ground opening up and swallowing them up. Yeah, they've not seen that before. And what? Verse 31, it happens, just as he said. Swallows up Korah, Dathan, Abiram, and then the ground closes again. So this is no earthquake. And this is just, the ground like a mouth opening up and swallowing them up and closing. And then the Lord judging those who saw fit to offer incense before him, because again, they're not supposed to, and they're judged for it as well in verse 35. Now, as we come to the next paragraph, God then says that those censers are now holy. They were used as an offering, so they're holy, even though they shouldn't have been. And they choose to make a remembrance out of them. He has Eleazar the priest turn them into a covering that'll fit over the altar. And that covering will be seen whenever anybody in the nation of Israel comes anywhere close to the tabernacle or the future temple. And they will see this covering and they will remember this event, this judgment of God. This covering is to serve as a reminder to not rebel against God because of the judgment that will fall upon you if you do. Now, that doesn't seem to matter, because what happens, verse 41, on the very next day, the congregation grumbles against Moses and Aaron, saying, "You have killed the people of Yahweh." You can ask your kids about that too. Did Moses do it? Not at all. It was God's judgment on them. Moses actually prayed for them and saved some of them. The very people grumbling right now, Moses saved them by his prayers for them. But again, they don't see it. So God appears, tells Moses and Aaron again to get away, and he's going to destroy the congregation. And once again, Moses and Aaron standing up for the congregation before the Lord, interceding for them, making a sacrifice, making an offering, an atonement for them with another incense offering, and then standing in the midst of the people, in the midst of a plague, in the midst of the people, that the Lord would not continue striking them down. You see it there, verse 48, Aaron stood between the dead and the living, and the plague was stopped. Another 14,700 Israelites die, again, in judgment because of their continued rebellion against God. Unfortunately, that's not the last of the rebellion of sinful man. It has continued ever since. We're part of it, but again, we rejoice that we have Christ interceding for us, just as Moses interceded for the nation of Israel.